More people fear public speaking than fear death. It's taught wrong. The antidote is not looking over the heads of the audience. It's looking into their eyes for magic words that will reduce your nervousness.
Definitely calmed me.
I'm not a fan of practice. So let me tell you a story, which is also something I would recommend you do on Zoom calls. And we're going to get to ums, by the way.
I can imagine that working.
Because then it's real, it's authentic. So here's what you do if you lose the room. First of all, don't lose the room.
Hi, Richard. Welcome. And thank you so much for taking some time out to answer all of our BBC Maestro learners' questions.
Well, thank you, Lily. This is great. And I hope that people who are tuning in can get even more value than just from the course alone. I think it's really important to talk things through. And I love the questions that people have been sending in. And hopefully I can help you a lot. And the answers are going to be to the point and very take-home user-friendly. And then obviously for people who want to go more in depth, there is the course. And it's been really gratifying. I've had some comments, people saying, it was so valuable and I learned so much, I'm taking the course again. And I guess that's one of the valuable things. It's yours. You can go over it again and again and again.
Lovely. So let's start at the beginning with the starting a presentation. And one of the questions that we had come in from the audience is, what's the best way to start a presentation?
Got it. So I have two quick answers to that. Number one is the theme of my entire course is that great public speaking is really nothing more than having a conversation from the heart about something you are authentically passionate about. So if you were to imagine going to have a lunch meeting with a friend or a dinner meeting or just hanging out at a bar, you would never ask your question, oh my God, how do I start this conversation, right? Because it's what we do as human beings is we communicate primarily through conversation. Having said that, and we're going to get to ums, by the way. I have a different view on ums than most people in the public speaking world. Having said that, there are some things that you can do that will allow you to, in that other context of speaking to an audience, will allow you to feel more comfortable, feel more grounded, feel less nervous, and take control. So I'll give you my formula. Okay, I don't share this very often, but here are the secrets. Number one, if you are introduced by a human being, right? You're coming onto the stage to give a talk. The first thing you want to do as part of this conversational vibe is you want to interact with the person who introduced you. So as they're walking off the stage and you're walking on, you want to shake their hand, you want to look into their eyes, and you want to give them a hug or whatever it is, and you want to say thank you, right? So then you walk up to the microphone or you walk to the front of the stage or the front of the room, and this is kind of a strategic thing, but it's also just classy and just a lovely bit of manners, is you acknowledge the person who introduced you, who very well could be the organizer, and say, isn't James great? Let's give a big hand for James. And then you lead people in that acknowledgement of the person who just introduced you, who could very well be the organizer. Okay. So what does that do? It's really critical. First of all, it's not like ready, set, go, and you're not like a robot. You're a human being. You're having a human interaction with the person who introduced you. And then you're being very classy and very gracious, and you're acknowledging that person. But when you say, before one word comes out of your mouth about what you're talking about, when you say, let's all do this, like give James a hand, you're immediately planting into their brain that you're in charge, that you're the leader, and your first thing before you ever say anything is you are leading them to actually do something physically, which is to clap their hands, right? So that takes so much pressure off. So what happens, for example, if there is no human being, and it's a voice of God, or someone just says, okay, Richard, get up there. There will be an organization, there will be a group, there will be something that has sponsored you, that has created that seminar, that lecture, that opportunity for you to engage, right? And you can thank them without looking in their eyes and hugging them or whatever, and say, let's give the Kiwanis Club or the whatever, a big group, a big hand for organizing this, right? So again, buys you a little time to get centered and grounded. So then the third thing that is part of the kind of advanced professional speaker system of super hacks, which I'm giving to you right now at the beginning of this broadcast, is you turn the tables on the audience and you take the pressure even more off of yourself and you ask a question. So I ask a very obvious question. So I come in, I've connected with the person who introduced me, I've acknowledged the person who introduced me by getting the whole audience to participate in that. I've taken leadership, and then I put the focus on the audience and I say, raise your hand. Again, I'm taking control again. Raise your hand if you are even a little bit afraid of public speaking. And this is a very easy question for me because the vast majority of people all over the world have some concern or fear. And then I'll drill down and I'll say, so let's find out. So I want to find out how much. And again, what this communicates is another major tenet of my course, which is 4 words. And Lily, you said you've taken the course. Do you know what my favorite 4 words are? The first word is it's all about them. It's all about them. So if I have in the back of my mind or in the front of my mind, oh my God, it's all about me. I wonder if I'm dressed okay. I wonder if I'm sounding okay. I wonder if they'll like me, all of that, which is very natural to do, right? But if that's my focus, I'm missing the entire point of giving a talk. I'm there for them. I'm there to share tips and skills and insights and my experience and stories that can inspire them and help them accomplish things that they want to accomplish in their life. Help them live a more fulfilling life, a more successful life. Just be in the presence of a new set of ideas and perspectives that can enrich their life for the rest of their life. That's my goal. So when I start and I say, okay, so how many of you are at least a little bit afraid of public speaking? Raise your hand, right? There's that, right? Now I'm going to go even further into that and I'm going to say, okay, listen, this is all about you. So I want to find out exactly where you are in this. How many on, if 10 is the scariest thing in the world and 0 is a walk in the park on a Sunday afternoon with your family, right? No nervousness, no fear. How many of you are a 0? Okay, no fear at all. Okay, raise your hand. A 1, a 2, a 3, a 4, a 5, a 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And sure enough, there'll be some 9s and 10s. And then I'll say, wow, okay. I said, and then I'll say something like, okay, we're gonna bring you up in a few minutes. And then everyone's like, right? So it's this very conversational way to start. It's a very playful way to start, but it could be anything. If I'm a physicist, I could come in and I could say, how many of you know anything about quantum physics, right? For example, or got it? So then after I've done those 3 things, right? Connect with the organizer, acknowledge the organizer, ask question or questions, right? Then I've got some flow going on, and then it's so easy. I just jump in the river and it's already rolling.
Nice. I love it. On a practical note, when you start a presentation, I've heard different camps of thought around, should you qualify your credibility for standing on that stage in the first place? And, should your, like, part of your opening piece when you're doing a talk be, this is who I am and this is why I'm credible? Or should you assume, it's fine, everyone knows why I'm here, and I wouldn't be here if I wasn't credible, so I'm just going to dive straight in?
So that's a great question, right? If we think about what I just said, right? Those four magic words that will reduce your nervousness. It's all about who?
Them.
It's all about them. So I could be the most distinguished person in the world with 10 PhDs from Oxford and Cambridge. But that's irrelevant unless that expertise is relevant to them, right? So what I like to do is, so for example, if I'm talking about, so I absolutely do not agree with someone out of their own mouth giving their bio. What's more normal, of course, is the organizer who said, we're going to bring on Richard Greene. Richard is the BBC public speaking communication maestro, blah, 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 right? I mean, that's fine. I think being humble and not bragging about your stuff is very important, because I think you lose credibility with the audience. And again, it's not about me. It's about the audience. But if, for example, we're talking about, so I can infuse my experience, right? So if we're talking about, how different people around the world deal with public speaking and the fear of public speaking, I can say, well, I've actually taught in 53 countries around the world on 6 continents. And I have to tell you that the human response to the fear of standing up and doing what I'm doing right now is pretty consistent no matter where you go, right? So now I've integrated something, or I can say, oh, I have to tell you, people say, oh, you either have it or you don't. And if you're famous and if you're in the spotlight, you are confident and public speaking is not at all concerning to you. And I can say, well, I happen to have this incredible experience of being able to meet with and coach a very, very, very famous person, Princess Diana. And that was absolutely not true for her, because she, like so many people, was enormously nervous and concerned about her public speaking. It wasn't her favorite thing. She didn't have the ability, when I met her, or the perspective to understand that it was just an opportunity for her to be even more fully her authentic self, and that it wasn't a performance that she needed to do just perfectly, right? So now I'm weaving in some relevant parts of my background, and I find that to be much better.
And on the topic of nerves, we had quite a lot of questions around managing nerves and feeling anxious on stage. I know you cover this off really well in the course, but let's dive into some of the specific questions that we had. So one of the questions was, how do I stop myself from shaking with nerves or flushing when public speaking? Which I guess is that more extreme kind of end of nervousness and stage fright.
So first of all, I want to tell anyone who is experiencing nerves, and it's not a surprise that you got so many questions like that. Public speaking is the number one fear in the world. More people fear public speaking than fear death. And there was a Seinfeld episode, I think I talk about it in the course, where they were saying, oh, Jerry was saying, people fear public speaking more than death. So that means at a funeral, people would actually rather be in the box than standing up and giving the eulogy. So, which is just bizarre, right? It's ridiculous that it's come to this. But the reason it has is two things. Number one, we don't really teach public speaking very well or at all. And when we do teach it, it's taught wrong. It is literally taught in a way to increase the fear and anxiety that people have. Let me give you an example, and then this will help, because the antidote to this example is the right thing to do, which will significantly reduce your fear. The gold standard in public speaking is this premise that it's a performance, and that you should, in order to calm yourself down, not be distracted by those lowly people in the audience, right? And that you should look over the heads of the people in the audience. Have you ever heard that, Lily?
Yeah, I have. Yeah.
I mean, that's insane. Again, let's go back to my theme. It's all about them. So if it's all about them, like, why would you dismiss them, disregard them, minimize them, discount them? Why would you look over the? It's a little bit like saying, okay, I live in Los Angeles now. If I want to go to New York, I should go to LAX and get on a Hawaiian Airlines flight to Honolulu. It's the complete opposite thing to do. The antidote to fear is not looking over the heads of the audience, it's looking into their eyes. That's where human beings communicate. And what we now know scientifically is that when people look in each other's eyes, one on one, or even in a larger audience setting, oxytocin gets released in both human beings' brains. And you're a mother of three, and you know what oxytocin is. It's the bonding chemical that allows you to connect with the other human being. And very, very strong, of course, when a woman gives birth. Otherwise, with all the fatigue and the crying and everything, women would throw their children out the window, right? I mean, it's just because it's such a hard job. So there's that. The other thing about looking over the head, the gold standard was, look over the heads of the audience, but it also was this horrible, horrible thing, which is to imagine the people in the audience in their underwear or naked. Have you heard that?
I have heard that one as well. Yeah.
That's not like going to Hawaii if you want to go to New York. That's like going to Mars if you want to go to New York. Because there is such arrogance and such ego that's implied. It's like, I'm important. I'm dressed up in my best whatever, and they're sitting in their underwear. They're naked. They're nothing. And it's so disrespectful to the audience. That is why you are there. You are there for them. So you're there to give them something from your heart that you believe will help them. And minimizing them, discounting them, looking over their head, not only is incredibly disrespectful and rude, it makes you more nervous, because then you really are isolated up there. It's like, here I am. I'm the only one dressed. Everyone else is naked. This is weird, right? So answer number one to the question is to realize that you're not giving a speech, you're not giving a performance, you're not giving a presentation, you're having a conversation from your heart about something you care deeply about. Number two is to look into the eyes of the people, which is exactly what we do as human beings when we have conversations. And I'm a little concerned about our younger generations, because we have noticed they don't do that as much, because they're so busy looking in their phones and communicating through this piece of hardware that's in their hands, instead of the software of the human spirit and human soul by looking in each other's eyes.
I've certainly found when I've done talks myself, and also we talked about how I was in a band very temporarily, and in that instance as well, like connecting with people in the audience that I knew and finding those people and looking them in the eye definitely calmed me. So yeah, I completely agree that it's a great technique.
Can I bring up Taylor Swift for a minute, because it's a very relevant example for both of the questions that we talked about, which is how do you start and how do you overcome the nerves, the butterflies, whatever. So I had the opportunity to go to the Taylor Swift concert in Los Angeles several months ago. And I was, I'm a fan, I guess. You know, I like her music, I like her, whatever. But I went as a scientist, and it's like, okay, this woman is creating the most profound reactions and loyalty and love and following of anybody in the world today. What is her secret? What is she doing? And in the first few minutes, she explained the whole thing. And it's exactly what these two questions are. So if you have an opportunity to see Taylor, I know tickets are hard to get, um, you know, do it just for this alone, which is why I wrote an article and then Forbes magazine interviewed me about what CEOs can learn from Taylor Swift, and I could teach a whole course on that. But let me address this in the beginning. So as everybody's all excited, there's 70,000 people in the SoFi Center in Los Angeles, and she comes out, you know, like big and huge applause. So she walks out there, and she just stands, and you could see her, you know, live, and then of course on all the screens, and she's just there. She's just grounding herself, being present, and as if her body, as if every cell in her body was a sponge, and she was just standing there, and you could see her filling up with the love and appreciation of the audience. And she took it in, and she wasn't in any hurry to get started because it was about her acknowledging the audience by listening so deeply with her heart and every cell of her body. And she went and she takes it in. She gets a little teary eyed, and she goes, and, you know, in the most sincere, beautiful, honest, authentic way I've ever seen a performer interact with an audience. And she goes, thank you so much. I love you all so much. And it was like, whoa. Now, that's not going to be relevant for somebody giving a talk about quantum physics or, you know, maximizing, you know, second quarter returns or whatever. But I the idea that you are there for them and you are vibing with them and you are tuning into them and you are appreciating them and you are loving them in your own way is incredible. Just like if you meet a friend you haven't seen in a long time for lunch at your favorite restaurant in London, the beginning, you wouldn't go and start and say, so now let me tell you about what I've been doing for the last 3 years. You would say, how are you? Oh my God, it's so great to see you. Smile, kiss, kiss, hug, hug, right? So some form of that human interaction is the best way to overcome it. So you're not having a performance, you're not giving a speech, you're not giving a presentation, you're having a conversation from your heart, and you're looking into their eyes and creating that human connection that will calm you down. It'll connect you with the audience. They'll feel connected to you as well. And that's my answer.
I love it. If someone asks me, like, how do I stop myself feeling nervous? My number one answer is just practice over and over and over again. And the more you do it, the more comfortable you feel, or the more you get used to that feeling.
So I'm going to say something that's a little revolutionary. And that is, I'm not a fan of practice. So first of all, there's this idea practice makes perfect. No, that's not true. Only perfect practice makes perfect. But the bigger thing is, so I've taught tennis, I taught drums for a little bit. I taught tennis for 10 years. And teaching tennis, and I've taught public speaking for almost 40 years. Teaching public speaking is fundamentally different than teaching something that requires the development of actual skills that you've never ever developed in your entire life. So if you're 30 years old, you've been speaking for 28 or 29 years. But when you first walk out onto a tennis court or sit behind a set of drums, you've never done that before at all. There is no muscle memory at all, right? So when you say practice, you do not, Lily, need practice on having a conversation. Very few people need practice on that. They may need new perspectives and some techniques and some things. It's like, hey, well, maybe you want to ask more questions when you're on a date, for example, right? Things like that, right? Where you can leverage a skill, a talent, and ability that you already have to another level. So in public speaking, there are two things. One is the skill set. One is the basic thing of just having a conversation, right? And if you can just shift your perspective that what you're doing in front of the audience is simply having a conversation from your heart about something you are authentically passionate about to two or more people instead of maybe one person, that alone shifts things. It's like, oh, okay, I got this. I got this. I'm just having a conversation about the second quarter profits of my company or quantum physics or whatever it is. Um, there is a small area in public speaking where practice does help. For example, if you look at secret number 2, which is voice tone, that takes a little while to create new skill sets regarding your variation of your voice tone or being able to pause and feel comfortable pausing. Secret number 1, words and storytelling. It takes some practice, but not a lot, to learn how to tell a story in present tense, because the natural way is to tell it, something that happened in the past, to tell it in past tense. So in that way, there's practice. But I often tell my clients, and from presidents and prime ministers, CEOs, entrepreneurs, celebrities, to wing it as much as possible, because then it's real, it's authentic. One of the challenges, I think, with some of the TED Talks, for example, that I see is they're too practiced. They're too formulaic, as opposed to just let it rip, because authentic passion is what drives the audience to love you, to pay attention, and to be inspired by you. And if you are so practiced, you take some of the passion out of it. It becomes more of a rehearsed thing, more dry, more robotic, and becomes less authentic.
I love it as an answer. It means less work for me. So that's great.
If I have a written out word for word 40-minute speech, and every single word is important, I'm going to want to go through that once or twice. But as I think I demonstrated in the course, and I do in all my workshops around the world, is you could give you could give me a speech, and in the very first reading of it, when I've never even seen it before, I can make it work. And I demonstrate the techniques on how to do that. Whereas you turn it into a conversation, you ad lib, you repeat a phrase here and there, you make it your own, and then you don't need to practice it in the same way because it's real time and it's authentic.
And actually, that was one of the other questions was, is it better to read from a script verbatim, memorize a speech, or ad lib?
Yeah, let me address it. This is super important. I am not a fan of memorizing anything. And I live here in LA, and a lot of actors, right? They spend all night the night before they're filming a movie or a TV show memorizing. So if you're an actor, yes, memorize. But if you're giving a speech, don't memorize. And I'll tell you why. Because if you live by memorization, you can die by memorization. So if you've memorized, it's okay. Now, two things are happening. You're not connected with the audience. You're connected with the script that's running in your head. So your focus is here instead of where it needs to be, into the eyes of the people in the audience. That's number one. Number two, you're already nervous. And at least for me, if I try to memorize something, that increases my anxiety. It's like, oh my God, I better not forget. Am I going to forget? What if I screw up, right? And then thirdly, if you do screw up, it's very hard to rebound from that, So but the thing is, if you memorize something, it is almost impossible for it to come across as having a conversation, right? Oh, this is just a robot up there who has done a very beautiful job over the past 3 weeks of memorizing every word of this thing. That doesn't make me feel closer to you. And it's all about that human connection. So now reading is the other option. So do I memorize it? You might want to memorize a quote or some little part or a formula or some soundbite. That's fine, but not the whole thing. So I'd say don't memorize. Reading, either off a teleprompter or off a piece of paper. I would say that sometimes that's unavoidable, right? Someone, you're a CEO and your communication people hand you this big speech or presentation, and you got to do that. But there are two things I would suggest that you do if you have to read it. Number one is that you read it in a very conversational way, right? And that you ad lib. So, for example, I learned this in large part from watching Bill Clinton. And I remember one time it was the 2012 Democratic Convention, and Bill Clinton was the keynote speaker for President Barack Obama as he was running for his second term. And I was sitting in this huge arena, 25,000 people, and I was sitting in a way where I could see President Clinton, and I could also see this giant screen, which was his teleprompter. And it was fascinating to me because the poor teleprompter operator, like, he would ad lib everything. And President Obama has been one of the most successful presidents, in modern history, and that was what's written. And then he goes, you know what? Let me tell you about that. Let's talk about this. People often say blah, blah, blah. And he would go on and ad lib, and then he would come back to where he was. So if you're going to read something, own it, make it yours, humanize it, personalize it. Okay. The other bit of advice. So don't memorize it. You can read it, but read it in a way that doesn't look or sound or feel like you're reading it. My favorite thing is bullet points, right? If you can do that. But the very, very best way and the easiest way and the most comfortable way, if you can do it, is to use PowerPoint to have your bullet points up there, and you could have videos and pictures and graphs and statistics, and you're having a conversation. It's a three-way conversation where you have everything up there. You don't have to worry about it. You're not going to get lost. You don't have to memorize. You just click, boom, we're on to the next slide. And you're now having a conversation with the audience and with the teleprompter. I mean, but with the PowerPoint slides, right? And it still feels very warm and friendly and conversational, as opposed to having what the big mistake so many people make with their PowerPoint is they have like every word and everything, and then the audience is confused. Do I read the stuff on the PowerPoint, or do I pay attention to Richard? You have as little on there as you can to make the point, to serve as a guidepost for you and as an opportunity to create a conversation with the audience. Does that make sense? That's an incredibly important thing, because ultimately that's probably one of the biggest questions I ever get. So what do I do? So hopefully that helped.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the other things that came up as a question, and certainly I've experienced, is when you're presenting and when you're talking through those bullet points, there can sometimes be a tendency to rush through things, especially when you're nervous. You're like, I've got to hit that and that and that and that. And you're trying to manage your time and get all your points across. So, and your nerves and your adrenaline are going, and you're kind of reacting to that experience. So do you have advice for when you're in that situation? I guess firstly recognizing that you're rushing through, and then also like how you slow that pace down.
So would we be having this question about you describing a lunch meeting with a dear friend?
So I think potentially, yeah, if you had something really exciting to tell someone and you only had a short time to tell them, then you'd be very animated and you would rush through it quite quickly.
So I agree. And then as the friend could say, wow, this is amazing. Okay, take a breath, have a drink, here's some beer or whatever, right? But that's very different than rushing through based on nervousness, right? And that's what I was saying. And it's like, but there's the reason it doesn't very often happen, except when you're like super excited. It's like, oh, right, with a friend. And it pretty often happens when people are giving speeches, is because when you're having a communication with your friend, you're looking in their eyes. I cannot stress how important eye contact is. The eyes are the windows to the soul. So there's that, and they also ground people. You're looking in their eyes and you're looking to see the reactions. So I am reading the room, and that's one of my favorite chapters or lessons in the course, the Maestro course, is on reading the room. Your job as a speaker to be good, for you to be comfortable, for the audience to be engaged, for the audience to get the most out of it, you have to read the room. If they've already emotionally, mentally, spiritually left the room, there's no one there to talk to. So you need to read the room, you need to engage them. That's going to slow you down. That's going to anchor you. That's going to ground you, because it's not about who? It's not about you. All the pressure is not on you, it's about them. I want to read your reaction. Oh my God, you're folding your arms. So let me look at you. Let me make some eye contact with you. Let me change the speed of, or the volume, or the pay, or the pitch. Let me put some pauses. Let me put some punctuations. Let me bring you back. This whole part of the room has just gotten cold because I'm reading the room. So I'm going to go over, I'm going to walk over there, or I'm going to look over there, and I'm going to engage. I might even ask them a question. So does this make sense? Raise your hand if this makes sense. Or a rhetorical question. The world would be a better place if we all did that, right? Boom. I'm not asking for an actual response. It's a rhetorical question. So I'm engaging. I'm constantly using the audience to anchor me, to connect me with that connection. That is the only reason that I'm there in front of them.
I love that. And I can imagine that working, of like, when you're going through something at pace and then looking to check to see if everyone's got it, and probably seeing some blank faces of like, you're going too fast and I haven't taken any of that in.
Right, but I never let the horse get out of the barn, where I'm now chasing the audience. I'm constantly on top of the audience, and because I'm spending so much time reading the room. And if you talk to any professional speaker, right, or a comedian, or anybody who's in front of the room, that is life or death to a speaker. You have to read the room, and you have to read it from the very beginning all the way through. And if you get too much in your own head, like, oh, I got to do this, or I want to do this, you're trying to memorize, recall something you memorize, or blah, 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 then every millisecond that I'm in my head, I'm not doing what? I'm not reading the room. And they could get away from me. And it's like, oh my God, I've lost the room.
You say that you never lose the room yourself, but for those of our listeners and learners at BBC Maestro, one of the questions that we had was, how do you recover when you sense you are losing the audience attention?
Let me humbly say that is not true. I've been a professional speaker for almost 40 years. There have been times where I've either seen, it's like, oh damn, I'm losing them, right? And then I can always say, okay, I got sloppy, I got lazy, right? And if you've done something so many times, that can happen. It's like, okay, I never phone it in, but maybe I phone it in 1 or 2%, and that could be enough, right? So it's like, okay, I'm losing the room, or darn, I've lost the room, right? And it's every comedian's worst nightmare, or whatever. So here's what you do if you lose the room. First of all, don't lose the room, okay? Right? Stay so connected to the room that you can sense. For example, one of the things I talked about in the body language part of the course is if you're talking to someone and their feet are pointing straight towards you, and you're having a conversation with them at a dinner party or a cocktail, whatever, and they turn one of their feet to leave the interaction, you've got to notice that. You notice that, you go, okay, I'm beginning to lose that person. They're out the door. They're partway out. They're 20% out. Oh my God, now they're 30%. How do I bring them back? Or I just end that interaction. So a couple things. There's some magic things you can do if you lose the room. Ready? Number one is engage them by asking a question. Questions, if you look at a question mark, it looks like a shepherd's hook. And that's how questions operate. They literally operate like you go out and you grab the sheep. I'm not saying audiences are sheep, but that's what a shepherd hook would do. And you bring them in. So you're going, okay, I've just lost them. Okay, so how many of you blah, blah, blah? Or what would happen if we blah, blah, blah? So I can either say, raise your hand. I might even engage. I say, what would happen if we started learning how to do better presentations and we nailed every single presentation we made as a company, right? And then I'm looking at someone and they've got a reaction. I go, Jason, or Sally, I see that you're processing that. What do you think? Right? Now, what I've done is I've completely stopped the losing of the room and I've engaged them, which is also something I would recommend you do on Zoom calls, right? It's because people they're so happily non-engaged and they're doing their emails and they're doing texts or whatever. But if you go and say, so Lily, what do you think about this? And you establish this kind of law school professor Socratic math method sort of interaction, everybody else on the call is going to go, oops, I better start paying attention because I may be called next. So that's one technique on if you're losing the room on a Zoom call or other virtual meeting. So number one, ask questions of the audience, either actual questions, raise your hand, how many of you, whatever, or rhetorical questions. Actually engage with the audience and say, well, let me hear what you have to say, or stand up, let me hear what you have to say, right? So now you're back to taking control, completely shifts. The other way to completely shift is something called a pattern interrupt, where you go, okay, so what are we going to do now? So I change my pace, I change my volume. I might do something that operates like a real shift in the energy of the room. And then I'll say, so what are we going to talk about now? So how do we handle this challenge, right? And then the third way to get a room back when you've lost them, and again, hopefully you never do, but if you do, is 6 magic words. Let me tell you a story. Because you know this, you have 3 kids. Has there ever been a time in the history of human motherhood or fatherhood where a child has said to the mother or father when they're going to bed, Daddy, Mommy, please don't tell me a story. I'm just going to go brush my teeth and go to bed all by myself. No, it's like, please, please, please tell me a story. And oh, another one. No, you have to go to bed. No, please, just one more, right? Am I right on that?
Yeah,
Right?
definitely.
That is because stories are primal. They're an essential, primal part of our species. And you cut through The chatter in the audience's brain when they're going, this is not very good, or I'm bored, or what am I going to eat for lunch, or how am I going to handle this problem at the office, blah, blah, blah. And you go, let me tell you a story. You immediately bypass their adult brain. You go to their primal kid brain, and they go, oh, story. Oh, yeah. And they kind of get paralyzed in a really happy state. Oh, story time. Right? No, it literally happens. And then you go, okay, so let me, and you can do both. So let me tell you a story. Boom. So you're shifting everything. It works 99% of the time. But then you better have a story.
Yeah.
Well, so it could be, so like you're talking about, how to increase productivity, blah, blah, blah. So let me tell you a story about how a company, or how we 2 years ago were able to radically transform, our revenue stream, blah, blah, blah.
Amazing. Thank you. Okay, so we're gonna move on to another topic, which is, I guess we've covered this off a little bit already, but talking about the actual kind of delivery. So this is one of my filler words, kind of. I say it all the time, 2 words. Sometimes I say kind of like, which I think is a very English West Country thing. And there I say a lot as well. So for people who use filler words like and are and kind of or kind of like, what are your tips for that situation?
So I have a very strong feeling one way and a very unusual feeling the other way that might surprise people. First of all, I think that the word really is diminishes your authority. People throw in the word really a lot, and they what was the other word that you used? Oh, kind of. Kind of is not a powerful phrase, right? So notice, and if you ever tape yourself, notice how often you use filler words. I think that's a really good exercise, right? Having said that, there is an organization called Toastmasters who is I was their international keynote speaker back in 2004. And so I got to know the organization fairly well. And they do have this obsession with not using ahs and ums. And that's a common thing, that it's a bad thing. And I have a different perspective. In a perfect world, do you want to not use ahs and ums? Yes. But I would rather someone be authentic and natural. So if by controlling yourself to be so perfect that you don't use ahs and ums or kind ofs or reallys, if that makes you less authentic and less having a conversation, then I don't think it's worth the trade-off. So I gave this speech in 2004 at the International Toastmasters Convention, their annual convention. And I was selling my book, Words That Shook the World, way back in 2002, and signing it. And I had literally a line of people, and I'm not saying this to brag, it's just to give the context of this, that was 3 hours. I was there for 3 hours signing books. People waited for 3 hours, right? And in the middle of that, about an hour and a half in, someone comes up and takes out a notepad and said, Mr. Greene, during your presentation, which was very good, but during your presentation, you had 12 ahs and 14 ums. And I got really pissed off. And I want to talk a little bit about swear words as well. I got really pissed off because I just gave everything I had from my heart. And sometimes you say and sometimes you say I hadn't memorized it. I was there in the moment. And sometimes is it better to have a silent pause rather than or yes. but I was so organically just being myself and being in the moment, right? That, yeah. So I made those mistakes. And I said to him, I said, listen, ahs and ums can be distracting, but I want you to turn around and I want you to look. There's another hour and a half of a line there. And that's not because of the amount of ums or ahs that I had or didn't have. It's because I poured out my heart in the most authentic way that I possibly could. And I would suggest that that's what you focus on. And I would say that to everybody. So don't worry about filler words, be authentic. And when it comes to swear words, um, there is a risk to irritating people and upsetting people if you use swear words. My friend Tony Robbins uses them probably every other sentence. You look at Jon Stewart, you look at Bill Maher, some people, talk show hosts, at least in the United States. Donald Trump uses them apparently now almost every speech. There is there is something authentic about just saying whatever it is you feel that you want to say, and that's a plus. However, there are people who are going to be upset by it, and they may tune you out and even leave the room. So that's a battle between authenticity and being more respectful of people. But I don't think that same calculation is true for ahs and ums or even kind ofs or reallys.
Okay, so let me tell you a story. My storytelling is terrible because I can never remember the story in the way that I want to in the moment. Like, I feel like a good story is quite sharp and not waffly. And I feel like sometimes when I'm storytelling, it can be quite waffly. So, do you have any tips or techniques for making your storytelling really as compelling as possible?
Um, Storytelling is something where um, every single time you do tell it, you tend to refine it and you get to the point where you do focus on it. So it's a little like a comedian, even the best comedians in the world, they go to little comedy clubs before they go on a big tour or they go on television, and they're refining their storytelling, i.e. their jokes, right? So I would recommend that, right? And you could just practice it. But the key point that would allow you, I think, to minimize the waffling and tell better stories is to focus on telling it in present tense, which brings you into the moment in a way where it makes it more real for you. And that increases the quality of your voice tone, the energy, and I think also the flow. So I walk into this room and I look to my left and I see my daughter and I say, blah, 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 that kind of thing, as opposed to, well, my daughter and I had this conversation about blah, blah, blah. So if it brings it more to life, and you're more in the story, I think it's going to be easier for you to have a really strong through line. The second thing you want to do in telling a great story is lots of detail. So I look at my daughter and she's got this really quizzical look on her face, which is like, Dad, are you kidding me? Right. So, and then the third thing is conversation. So I'm thinking to myself, oh my goodness, my daughter's really going to bust me on this or whatever. And so I look at her and I say, sweetheart, what are you talking about? You seem very concerned. And then she says, blah, blah, blah. I mean, I'm just completely making that up. But the point is, good TV shows, good movies, compelling TV shows, compelling movies, compelling podcasts, everything are all about great, animated, passionate conversation. And if you are stripping the conversation out of it, so we had a conversation and we decided that we were going to go on this trip for our next holiday, as opposed to, and she says, I don't want to go to Iceland. I went to Iceland. I didn't like it. It's too cold. And I say, but there's a volcano there and it's the most exciting thing. And it might not ever happen again in your lifetime. She goes, Dad, I just don't want to go to Iceland again. Right. Right. That's much more engaging than saying we had a conversation. We decided we were going to go to the Philippines or we were going to go to London instead of Iceland. Right. You know, bring us into the humanness of that story.
I can picture myself rehearsing these stories in my head already.
Well, but again, you don't rehearse a story when you're going to have lunch with a friend, right? So if you are giving a formal presentation, you may want to rehearse it a little bit, but understand that basic storytelling is very organic, right? Except, when if you have like, for example, a very short amount of time, I only have 5 minutes and I want to tell these two stories, right? And I want to separate out the unnecessary stuff, right? That's fine, but it's still going to be conversational and driven by your passion and your conversations and present tense and the details.
So, going to a very practical question that came in, what are your tips for handling technical issues during presentations? I guess if you are, working with a screen, or lighting or microphone and things like that, there are occasionally issues where those things fail on you. So how do you maintain composure?
It's a great question. There's something that Tony Robbins taught me a long, long time ago, and it's this principle of utilization. So just like a comedian, someone heckles them, they utilize it, they turn it around. Say, oh, it looks like somebody's having a bad day today. Tell me about it. What's going on with you, right? Or something. The lights go out. It's like, okay, everybody, let's hold hands and let's imagine we're in a campfire. Let's light up a campfire. Whatever. I mean, you've got it. You just roll with it. And if the screen, so for example, Donald Trump was giving a speech last weekend in Las Vegas, and the teleprompter operator apparently was screwing up, and he complained about it. You don't want to complain about anything, right? If the screen goes down, if the mic stops working, if whatever, you just that's where you're going to get judged more than anything. And that is the thing, for better or worse, that people are going to remember, like how you handled the crisis. So, of course, everybody, if you do a lot of speaking, there are going to be times where things go wrong, where the electricity goes out, where the mic goes out, and they've got to come in and put a new battery in the microphone, for example. And instead of going, like huffing and puffing and like, no, you're in charge of keeping the energy going. So let's say the mic goes out. Can you hear me? No. Okay, I think we need a new mic. And then you walk to the front, or you jump down from the stage and you walk around and say, can you hear me now? Let's just keep going until we get the mic working. Or the let's say the PowerPoint goes out and then the PowerPoint is very critical. Instead of going, oh my God, what am I going to do? I can't do anything. And say, okay, so we're going to get that fixed. Again, you just got to keep rolling, right? Utilize that as a way of creating even more of a connection to the audience. So, okay, so while we're waiting for the PowerPoint to get rebooted, right, or the computer to get rebooted, let's take a few questions, right? Anybody have any questions about that? And let's say they don't. Then you just ad lib. Again, you're there having a conversation about something you are passionate about in order to help that audience. So you just use that as an opportunity to do that. I mean, easier said than done, easier said than done. And that would take some practice. But first, the idea that everything that happens can be utilized for you to connect even deeper with the audience. And don't ever be a victim. It's one And another Tony Robbins phrase, he says, life doesn't happen to you, it happens for you. And if you apply that approach to your presentation, say, okay, oh my God, I'm not a victim of this electrical outage or whatever. It's happening for me. It's an opportunity for me to show how nimble I am, how much I know my subject, how unafraid I am, what a leader I am. By the way, let me just say one more thing. I've been a professional speaker for almost 40 years. I very strongly believe that it is never, ever, ever, ever the audience's fault. Oh, they were too tired, or they had been up early, or you were the 10th speaker, or whatever. Or they were hungry, it was before lunch, or they were sleepy, they had too much wine during their dinner, and you were the dinner speaker. I mean, I hear that from speakers all the time. Stop that. Stop that. Stop that. You are 100% responsible for the experience that your audience is having. It's not their fault. It might be harder if they're sleepy or they've been listening to so many speakers before you. Then get them to stand up and shake it off. And Tony Robbins does that all the time, for example. Lots of people rubbing each other's backs and jumping up and down and playing little games. So you have to take control. It is never the audience's fault. It's always your fault for not figuring out real time how to handle situations that happen, little glitches or the audience starting to disconnect. It's your responsibility to bring them back and bring them back even better. And if you have that approach, that it's your responsibility, that's going to change everything. And you're never going to be this victim up there, which is not a good look.
Great. Okay. So, how can I deal with difficult questions from the audience?
That's a great question and not a difficult one. Real simple. What you cannot do is shame the person, fight with the person, or ignore the question. Okay? You have to be authentic and you have to say, give your reaction. So someone asks a really tough question. You say, wow, that's a tough question, or that's an important question, or I haven't heard that question before. And you could, so I sit up because I am in that moment thinking, let me respond directly to what I think you are asking. And then please clarify if that doesn't help you and that doesn't answer the question. Or what you could do is you can turn it around, because sometimes what you think is a difficult question was you not fully properly understanding the question. So you can always buy a little time for you to figure out what you're going to say, create a connection, have the person who may be irritated with you or not liking you or not, or being very adversarial. You can create a stronger personal connection and say, you know what, I want to make sure that's a very challenging question and I'm going to answer it. But before I do, I want to make sure I understand it. Are you saying that blah, 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 and repeat it back? Right. So it gives you an opportunity to shape it a little bit more, gives yourself more time to come up with an answer. But I think the most important thing in answering a difficult question is to be authentic, is to be real. And if in fact you cannot answer it, say, you know what, I'm terribly sorry, I can't answer that question. It's not my area, or I don't know, or what I can do is I can connect you with somebody in the company who does handle that, right? But you want to do it in a cooperative way where you're really responding to them, not you're blowing them off. And the worst thing about a difficult question, because people know this, I see politicians do this all the time, where they're on a talk show, for example, I get asked a difficult question and they dodge it. They completely ignore the question and they go on to their 3 talking points that they've prepared with their media coach. People know. People can tell that you're BSing. So answer the question. And then, and here's the second part, if you want to pivot and provide context that that person might not have, or go to your talking points if they're relevant to the question, then absolutely do that. But you have to address the question. You have to acknowledge the person in the answer, as uncomfortable as that may be for the moment. And by the way, it is not, I know one of the other questions was, what if you don't know? You can gain more credibility for everything that you do know and everything that you just spoke about if you say the three magic words, I don't know. Whenever I hear a politician say that, it's like, wow, this guy is a master, or this woman is a master, because that shows so much competence and confidence and honesty and authenticity. You know what? Maybe I should know more about that, but I don't. I don't know enough, sir, unfortunately, to give you an answer. I'd be happy to check that out and I can get back to you. Right? That's one way to handle that. But don't be afraid of the words I don't know, unless it's a simple thing and you really should know and your job kind of depends on it. Then that might have consequences.
Richard, this has been so good. I think we've only got time for a couple more questions. So my first question to you, or my first last question to you, is, so do you get nervous when you do public speaking? And, have you ever, or have you recently had any failures where you thought, I didn't do that very well? And what happened?
I mean, in 40 years, yes, for sure. There have been times where it's like, oh, that sucked. I was not that great. But it doesn't happen. I mean, maybe a handful of times, to be honest. And it only mainly happened when I didn't read the audience in the moment. Right. And that's why I feel so strongly about it. You're there for them. You want to constantly monitor the energy in the room to make sure it doesn't turn into a disaster, because these things can become quite contagious, right? So if I see someone, for example, folding their arm and leaning back and with an expression like they're not interested, I will immediately address that directly with that person, or go, okay, that person, thank you, person who now just looked incredibly bored. You just gave me very valuable feedback that I may be losing the rest of the audience. So I'm going to shift. I'm going to go to a story, or I'm going to finish what I'm talking about. I'm going to go a little faster, or I'm going to go slower, or whatever. Right. So I have the same kind of presentation that I generally have given all over the world, but I give it differently every single time because the audience is different. I have different amounts of time. The context is different, what they're looking for, all of that. Do I ever get nervous? I sometimes get nervous if I go on television, right? Because I'm not in control in the same way, right? And it's a super short time, and it's like, I really want to be on my game. I only have 3.5 minutes or 5 minutes or whatever for this interview. So there's that. But in terms of giving a speech, I would say 10% might be nerves, but 90% is going to be excitement and energy. And I can't wait, right? It's like, and then, so what I will do to help with that is I'll sometimes do jumping jacks, I'll do push-ups, I'll do some deep breathing exercises. I talk about those in the course. I like the 1-4-2. You breathe in 1, you hold for a ratio of 4, you exhale, twice. That really oxygenates you. I might go for a walk. I might do something. I mean, we're human beings, right? And every single time you speak, you're going to be in a different situation. Just like you wake up, you don't wake up exactly the same way every morning. Sometimes you're a little more tired. Sometimes you're more energetic. Sometimes you're really kind of off. Sometimes you're really on. So I'm constant. So if I'm a little off, I might be a little more nervous. Like, God, I'm not in the zone. I want to get in the zone. And then I do what I can to get into the zone. I'll splash water on my face, whatever it takes, right? And the more you do it, the more you figure out the hacks. But it's exactly like I play tennis, right? It's like every point. Am I a little nervous? A little on it. It's like, this is an important point. I really want to be able to return the serve, right? And it's all about getting centered. The difference between a Carlos Alcaraz and a Rafael Nadal and a Novak Djokovic and a Roger Federer, the great tennis players, for example, and Andy Murray occasionally. He was pretty good for the UK audience, right? And people who have even better backhands, forehands, serves, whatever, who are ranked 250 in the world, is their ability to get back into the zone and to make the corrections to get back into the zone if they've lost it, even for a second, to approach it when they walk onto the court, when they walk in front of an audience, the same thing, to be in the zone. And the most important thing I can say about that is that when I go out to speak, the thing that calms me down the most is what I've been saying throughout this entire conversation. And that is, public speaking, I'm not doing it for me. It's not about me. It's not about how good I look or bad I look or how good I sound or how bad I sound, how impressive I am, how not impressive I am. It's, am I delivering value? Am I helping people with things that they want to learn, they want to experience, giving them a new perspective, inspiring them? It comes down to those four words. So it's like, I'm a little, I'm off. Then I focus, hey, you know what? It's not about me. It's all about them. And I go out and it's like, I want to help you. That's my focus. I want to share things with you that I have spent the last 40 years of my life learning so that I can help you. And I make the example, and I've talked about it in the course. If I gave you, Lily, 100 100-pound notes, and there were 100 people in the audience, and I said, your only job is to stand up on the stage and then, or in front of the audience, and go one by one and hand each of the 100 people in the audience a new crisp 100-pound note. Would you be nervous?
No.
You'd be pretty excited about that, right?
Yeah.
Like, wow, I'm giving them something of pretty significant value, free 100 pounds or $100 in the US. So and this is, again, how I deal with being nervous. If I thought that I was not giving at least 100 pounds worth of value, I would have a completely different relationship with my public speaking. And unless you have something that is of value of at least 100 pounds or $100, you shouldn't be talking anyway. So if you understand it, you're there for them, it's all about them, you're there giving them something, why in the world would you be nervous giving them 100 pounds worth of insight, value, skills, tips, perspectives? That's a huge thing, and it changes the fundamental nature of your relationship with the audience whenever you speak.
I love that. You mentioned at the beginning of this conversation that in school we tend to get taught public speaking in the wrong way.
If at all, if at all.
Yeah, exactly. As a parent myself, one of the questions that we had was, how do we support our young people to become better and better at public speaking and less afraid?
Yeah. So years ago, I had a 501c3 nonprofit corporation do exactly that. It was called the National High School Public Speaking Competition, Inc. And we had a bunch of celebrities and a bunch of competitions where we gave it a lot of money, and it was aimed at high school students. I would start even earlier. I think, like anything, if you look at the best athletes, they always start, whether it's tennis or basketball or football or whatever, they start really young. And for us, to say, okay, now you're in high school, you're about to go to college, you need to learn how to do public speaking, when they already now have a built-in relationship to it, which is usually one of fear. To start in the beginning and say, hey, just so, Sally, tell us about your summer vacation, or tell us, tell us about your little brother or your sister, or a story about them, and just in a very non-judgmental way to have people associate having a conversation while they're standing up, and not have it be this big fearful thing. Oh my God, public speaking, public speaking. So in simple ways to get people to start to be comfortable with communicating with more than one person in a non-judgmental, totally conversational way. That's what I would love to see happen. And I'd love to see curricula in, from even from 5 and 6 years old. And then the most important thing there would be not to be judgmental, and to be very supportive. And it's like, yay, you got up there, that was great. And I'm not in favor always of applauding people for doing anything, but this is a big step, just to step in front of a group of people. It's a primal thing. The reason public speaking is so scary is that we are pack animals, we are tribal people. And if you embarrass yourself in front of your community, in front of your tribe, there is a deep subconscious primal fear that you would be kicked out of the tribe. You'd be kicked out of the community. You'd be, denigrated in that way. And that literally would cause you maybe not even to be supported by the community, and therefore maybe you could die. That's how deep this fear goes. So the more your community supports you in sharing things in a non-judgmental way, by the time you're in high school or in college, it's going to be so comfortable for you, and you're going to allow that natural storytelling that comes. You've just seen a movie. Oh my God, you have to see this movie. It was so great, and there was this, and there was this, and there was that. We naturally are great public speakers. We're naturally storytellers, but we put it in this other category of public speaking, and put all sorts of pressure and all sorts of um, um, judgment on it. And so the younger we start in an opposite way of that, and encouraging people to share their stories and what they think and what they feel, they're going to be better communicators, especially in an age of cell phones and social media and AI. And they're going to be much more successful human beings in their personal relationships and in their business relationships.
So we just have time for one more question. Um, and I love this question. So it's not really about public speaking itself, but more about the doors that it opens up for you in terms of your career. What's the best way to build a public speaking career? And I suppose it's from the perspective of, doing the speaking yourself, but also coaching others in their speaking.
Right. Those generally are two different things. So not every great public speaker or professional public speaker coaches on public speaking. So let me address both of those. Number one, the most important thing, if you want to establish a career as a public speaker, and pretty much a career in anything, is to be the best in the world at what you do, right? To be and to have a unique perspective that no one else has, and a perspective that is valuable. So there are a lot of people who, for example, teach public speaking and give talks about public speaking. I have always driven myself to not pay attention to what other people think, what the old conventional wisdom is, what the gold standards have been. I have been so excited over the years, and I think that's one of the reasons that the BBC Maestro people invited me to do the course, is to do something in a unique and different and super user-friendly way, not caring about the conventions, but only focusing on what is the quickest, best, fastest, most fun way to improve. And so I've been very disruptive and very unique in my approach. And I'm very proud of that. But that also allows people to go, wow, this guy is different, right? So, in order to get jobs as a public speaking coach or as a speaker, you have to be unique, right? If you're doing things, teaching things in the same way everyone else is, or you're speaking in the same way everyone else is speaking, you're not going to stand out. So you have to be unique based upon your own personal passion, because that's what drives the energy and the inspiration. It's that authentic passion for whatever it is you're talking about, whether it's public speaking or quantum physics or business development or whatever, right? And then you have to make sure that it is beneficial to the audience. So you could be super unique, but it's not going to help that audience. That's not going to help you. It's got to be super unique and tremendously user friendly and beneficial for the people you're talking to. And understand that it's not an easy business. There are a lot of people speaking. Look at all the TED talkers, right? And sometimes there are not a lot of takers, not a lot of opportunities to speak. But if you feel drawn to be a public speaker, do it. Work on the speeches, the presentations that come deep from your heart and your soul. What is it that you want to share with the world? That is the driving thing, not what can I make money doing? What's the niche that I can fill? If you're moved to fill that niche, great, but it has to start there, because in today's world, especially with AI and a million other ways for people to get information, the thing that's going to make you unique and is going to get you jobs and get you known and get you invited to write books and be on TV shows and whatever is your unique, authentic passion, where you're approaching something differently than ChatGPT could approach it or anybody else who's ever given a TED talk about it. And you've got something unique and really powerful to share with the world. And in the process of you doing that, just the doing of it is going to be your reward. And even if it takes a while for you to get speaking gigs doing that, but you got to keep pounding it out and doing what you want to do, sharing the wisdom that you uniquely want to share and can share with the world, and the jobs are going to come. The clients are going to come.
Richard, thank you so much for all of your time. It's been such a great pleasure talking to you today. And I know that our listeners and watchers will be incredibly grateful as well.
And I want to thank you guys again. It is truly, for people who may not know much about the BBC Maestro series. I've rarely, if ever, met or worked with a group of people who were so on top of it, so cool, so dedicated to creating quality product. And it's been a real honor. And I am so grateful to be able to work with you, Lily, and the rest of the BBC Maestro team. And the greatest reward is the comments that people make, on the course and how it's helped them in their life. And, ultimately, I think that's why we're here on the planet, is to help other people. So it's been amazing to have the platform to do that. Thank you so much.